they're back. Certain white, middle-class, racial justice activists with too much time on their hands have decided to exploit Halloween to push their ideological dogma. Apparently, dressing your white children up as non-white characters is cultural appropriation and somehow racist. One activist said she talked her daughter out of dressing up as the Polynesian Moana because she wasn't from the Pacific Islands, or even Elsa from Frozen because she also wasn't blonde. Poor daughter. But how far do you take it? If dressing like Moana isn't allowed, what about those who wrote the story or even animated it? The kind of world this creates is the opposite of anti-racist. If these people had their way, we'd all be segregated cultures in silos, and we, people of colour, would be deemed authentic only if we aped the crudest of stereotypes about our cultures. Jamaicans with dreadlocks, Muslim women covering their faces. Cultural appropriation as a concept is racism, dressed up as anti-racism. I say, white children looking up to role models from people of colour is a good thing. They're not doing it out of mockery. This is not blackface. We should all participate in and celebrate different cultures rather than designate and isolate them.
So, Maajid, I actually agree with you. So if I focus on, for example, the Halloween costume element of your conversation, I love Halloween. I will, be the first in there to get into fancy dress. I think it's wonderful. And, I had somebody, I went to a Halloween party, and there was a person that was dressed up, and they were very heavily made to look like they were burnt. And somebody was saying, I find that deeply offensive, because what if you are, a burns victim? And so depending on which avenue you go down, there's always a reason why someone can feel offended by something, and sometimes they're valid and sometimes they're not. I'm of the mindset that I actually think about what is the intent behind people doing whatever it is that they're doing. And more often than not, people don't have bad intentions. People don't want to upset people. So I think that we've just got to be careful that we're not getting too overly sensitive and too easily offended, where the offence and the racism and things that people describe is just not meant. So I agree with you.
You end up in the kind of world where that offence is then policed. In King's College now, they have what they're calling safe space marshals, who are patrolling speeches. They did it with Jacob Rees-Mogg's speech. 5 paid-for marshals, paid for by King's College, just there to make sure that nobody was offended by what he said. And it's like, look, I have been a political prisoner in Egypt. I've witnessed torture. Halloween is a time where I see things that that remind me of things I saw in prison. I'm not going to turn up and say to people in a Halloween party, you can't dress like that because it reminds me of certain things I've seen.
You see, this is what I think what is dangerous is there's political correctness, and then there's political correctness when it goes too far. And I think what's happened in the whole world now is we've gone and tipped over. And when it goes too far, it actually is exactly the opposite of what it's trying to achieve. It becomes almost autocratic.
Yeah.
And here's an example that a school in Canada published a list of costumes which kids shouldn't dress up in. And I'll read out the list as they've published it. They've said, you can't dress up as cowboys and Indians, slaves, terrorists, gypsies, and Rastafarians.
Yeah.
Now, this is... And there are many other examples in Canada.
You think that people should dress up as those things?
No, I'm saying that for a school to actually prescribe that you can't dress up as this, this, and this...
Because when I read that list, I thought... And I have some sympathy for what you're saying, Maajid, and I read the blog that this is all based on by this mother, Sashi Ferris, and there are things in there I agreed with, and there are things I disagreed with.
I feel sorry for her daughter, to be
honest.
Well, she
tied herself in knots, right? Because it's not perfect, and I don't think... I'm not the police. I don't go around telling children what they can and can't wear. However, where I agree with her is that I think this is all about context. I agree this isn't about segregating cultures, but it is about context. So I was interested that you mentioned this is not blackface. Do you think there's something wrong with blackface?
If it's done out of mockery, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Context. Yeah. So in the past, people have dressed up as other cultures as a way of making fun of them and caricaturing them. I grew up seeing people... I grew up with very few black people around me, but at fancy dress parties, people would put blackface on and afro wigs and hold a spliff, and it was all a big joke. And, that was one of the only times I saw people referencing my cultural heritage, and I found that difficult. So if it's done in a spirit of mockery, then it's problematic. If it's in a context where people don't actually know about a culture, they have no curiosity in it, and I think that's the Moana issue. How much do people know about Polynesian culture other than the Disney version?
And this is where I think when Karen said it's gone too far, that's the point, because by saying gone too far is an implicit acknowledgement that there are times where this conversation is valid. So, for example, cultural theft. I recently watched a film, Ghost in the Shell, and then read the reviews and agreed with lots and lots of the reviews that they could have cast a Japanese person in that role instead of casting Scarlett Johansson, because it was filmed in Japan and there are plenty of good Japanese actors and it's a Japanese story. So when cultural theft is a valid critique from a cultural criticism perspective of this,
how far do you go?
but you shouldn't police it.
For example, is Sacha Baron Cohen playing Ali G?
No.
Is that offensive?
No, this is what I'm saying. First of all, you can't police it anyway. It's impossible to police. It's only ever going to be a conversation. But especially in the examples I gave, where this young daughter was looking up to Moana, wanted to aspire to be like Moana, because the story is of a young girl finding her own courage to find her own path. There's absolutely nothing wrong, and there was clearly no mockery involved in that young child wanting to dress like Moana from the Disney cartoon.
What I thought was sad was that, kids are not aware of colour or prejudice or bias. They just don't see it. And this woman sat her child down and she got into a heavy discussion about cultural appropriation, about race, about the privilege of whiteness.
She made her see colour.
She made her see colour. And I thought, and I just think, let her. All little kids want to be princesses. I mean, there was one quote where the little girl said, "Can I be Elsa from Frozen?" And Elsa's got a long blonde plait, and she said, "You can be Elsa without the plait." No, you can't. You've got to be Elsa with a blonde plait.
I don't agree that kids don't see colour. I think if you are a majority in a majority, if you're a white person in a majority white country, you probably don't see colour. If you're the only Polynesian kid in a very white community and everyone suddenly dresses up as Moana, you're conscious that you are the only person from that culture and that people are starting to use it. Now, if that's being done in a respectful way where they're curious about the culture and want to celebrate it, that's one thing. If it's to mock it, that's another. If you are a minority, you're very aware that you're the only person who looks
This girl was made to feel that she was
different.
belittling and insulting the Polynesian community. She wasn't. She just wanted to go to a party as a princess. It could have been any princess.
I just want to show you.
There was two.
I just want to show you an image because we've been talking about where things go too far. I'm curious to see what you think of this. This is a burqa fancy dress costume and a response from a woman wearing a burqa who felt that it was disrespectful. So this is a fancy dress costume that many people who are Muslim or not Muslim find offensive. And actually, one thing I want to say in defence of the woman who wrote this blog is that she's a white American woman. She's saying that as white people, we also have a duty to think about the messages we send when we use other people's cultures and costumes. Now, one of the problems I have, this debate is often framed as a problem for minority people. I think it's everyone's responsibility to think about the way we communicate cultures.
I just want to clarify something as a Muslim in this debate. That's not Muslim culture. That's Saudi Arabian culture, but Muslim culture is as diverse as there are Muslims in the world. And so if one takes offence at Saudi Arabian culture being mocked, then I'd argue that actually you're mocking power, because in Saudi Arabia, that dress is enforced by law and women are punished for not dressing like that. So it deserves mockery.
But you're also doing it in a context where there is a lot of prejudice towards Muslim people.
But there are countries that will lash
context.
women for not dressing like that. So if we laugh at the Life of Brian, if we laugh at the Book of Mormon, if we laugh at other power structures being mocked, including white supremacy, we should be able to mock that power structure.
That is a critique of
that is a critique of power. No, it's a critique of power.
To your point,
it's a critique of power. What about this one? What do you think of this outfit? Is that appropriate? Because that's David Walliams. In my opinion, it's a bit lame, actually. He's supposed to be Kim Jong-un. He's not done a particularly good job, but is that appropriate?
Is
it not?
Rocket Man.
Yeah.
The beloved leader.
Isn't it a good idea to borrow things from other people's cultures? Isn't that good? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
And sometimes to mock them.
Yes,
when it's power you're mocking, it's important.
I think we get distracted by the clothes, right? This isn't about the clothes. It's about the power, as we were saying. And the problem is...
For this girl, it was about the clothes. For this little girl, it was about the clothes.
Lives in a society where cultures are not equal, where some cultures are still surrounded by prejudice and bigotry.
So you're the mother. What would you say to the girl? If you're the mother, if you're Sashi Ferris, who's the mother?
My daughter, who's a beautiful little black girl with afro hair, has a blonde Elsa braid. Yeah. This is a source of some consternation because all her friends...
For who?
For us, because she's the only, or one of the only children in her school who has hair like that, and lots of the other children do have blonde braids, and she often says, I wish my hair were more like these other little girls, because that's what princesses look like. Now, I haven't
That's not to do with colour. Every kid wants different hair from the one they've got. It's not to do with colour.
In a society where the predominant message of what beautiful is and what a princess looks like is a little blonde girl.
I grew up wishing my hair was...
That's just reality.
I grew up with everyone wishing their hair was like mine, because Michael Jackson was massive in those days. I mean, it can work both ways, and actually it's just about who you look up to, really. That's all it is, who you aspire to be like in terms of role models. This little girl saw Moana and aspired to be like her. And that's innocent. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.